Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this new edition of the IEFA Conversation Series brought to you by the International Economic Forum of the Americas. I'm Drew Armstrong. I'm the Senior Editor for Healthcare at Bloomberg News based in New York. And today I'm with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization. Hello, Dr. Swaminathan, and thank you so much for joining us. I believe the last time you and I spoke was sometime maybe in December, right at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, when the first vaccines had been approved in a few countries. I want to get your impressions and kind of check back in on the progress of vaccinations so far since the start of this. What have you observed? How do you think this is going, both from a global perspective and then even, I know there's been some certainly individual differences between how countries have succeeded or failed that we've been watching very closely, with some countries racing ahead quite rapidly and getting vaccines out there, and others just seeing kind of a trickle of inoculations happening at the beginning here.
Thank you, Drew. Nice to be talking to you again. Indeed, a lot has happened in the last 3 months. It's really hard to believe. First of all, it's hard to believe that within 12 months, about 314 days from the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that we actually had not one but several vaccines that were completing phase 3 trials and were going into large-scale programs. So in the last couple of months, we've seen a big scale up of vaccination programs worldwide, but there are lots of inequities hidden there. So lots to be happy about. The fact that we have so many vaccines now that have passed the minimum quality benchmarks of efficacy and safety. And just today we had results from another clinical trial from AstraZeneca that also showed that the vaccine not only is highly effective in preventing symptomatic infection, but the good thing about all of these vaccines is that they really are very protective against severe disease and hospitalization, leading to death. So this is what we wanted the vaccines to do. And they're there now. And the private sector and the public sector and governments all collaborated to make this happen. Now, today, more than 400 million doses of vaccines have been administered globally. That is huge in a matter of a couple of months. But 80% of these vaccines have been distributed in just 10 countries. And there are still over 40 countries in the world that have not started vaccinating at all. Not a single person has had a single dose of a vaccine. The WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros, called for a 100-day challenge, which is basically that every country in the world should be vaccinating their priority populations, that's healthcare workers, the elderly, frontline workers, in the first 100 days of this year. And we're very close now. We are, I think, something like 25 days away from that goalpost, and we're still far away from having this equitable distribution. The COVAX facility, which was set up both to accelerate the development of vaccines through investments in a broad portfolio of vaccines through CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, and at the same time ensuring that we have pooled procurement set up through Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which is used to procuring millions of doses of vaccines for children, mostly in developing countries. But in this case, the COVAX facility had a very ambitious goal, which was to get at least 2 billion doses of the vaccine distributed before the end of 21, to extend the coverage to both high-income, middle-income, and low-income countries, so self-financing countries, as well as countries for whom the vaccines would be subsidized by donors, and to try to bring an end to what we call the acute phase of the pandemic, to stop the deaths and to stop the suffering and the illness so that the world can start taking steps back to recovery by the end of 2021. Those were our goals, but we can talk about the challenges of getting there.
I want to jump in with a question right away from one of the first things you said. We have had a lot of success in the clinical trials. Has that surprised you, the number of these vaccine candidates that actually have proven efficacious? It seems like the hit rate on this is actually very, very good. I've covered the drug industry for a long time. I've covered the pandemic since the beginning. And I think, I have unfortunately learned to be a bit of a pessimist when it comes to drug and vaccine development, because most of this stuff fails, but yet it looks like the success rate has actually been quite astonishing with most of these vaccines. Has that surprised you?
Yes, it has. You're absolutely right. Normally, the success rates of vaccines are less than 10%. But in this case, it's been far higher. And that's been a combination of factors. The most important one being that the virus itself, the immune uh, reaction that it elicits in the human body, means that the immune response can actually contain and control the infection. Because there are many infections like TB and malaria, where, as you know, we don't have vaccines because the immune system uh, doesn't have a clear response to controlling the infection. So I think it is very good. However, we have to remember that because of the variants that are emerging and the concerns that some of these vaccines may become less effective over time, we have to be constantly monitoring that and also looking to see how we may need to improve our vaccines or go for a broader set of antigens. Most vaccines today focus on the spike protein, but for the newer generation, we could be looking at different things. So, but you're absolutely right. I think the scientific success of this whole endeavor has been staggering, and it's been due to a huge global collaboration in these efforts, as well as a lot of resources, of course, that have been put in.
I want to come back to something you said in terms of the rollout so far with the 400 million doses that we've seen administered globally. But you mentioned the vaccines versus the variants. How should we be thinking about this in kind of a short-term problem of the immediate vaccination campaign that's going on, and seeing concerns about escape variants, meaning mutations that could cause diminished immune response from a vaccine, or escape it entirely? How should we be thinking about this, both in terms of the efficacy of a initial vaccine campaign and then what it means for future control of this virus? I mean, are we going to be thinking about this not as how do we eradicate, SARS-CoV-2, but really how do we suppress it and then live with it going forward?
That's really important. I think in the short term, we need to focus on scaling up vaccination programs, getting as many people vaccinated and as many people with immunity against this. Because even if they get infected with a variant, we believe that the immunity that they would have got from being vaccinated would be enough to protect them from getting seriously ill and ending up in the hospital. So right now, that the focus really must be on protecting people, especially the most vulnerable, through the available vaccines, all of which, like I said, are very effective against preventing severe disease. Now, looking further ahead in the more medium to long term, we have to do several things. One is to have a good global monitoring system of the development of these variants. And the WHO recently had a big meeting and will continue to engage experts from around the world in developing a risk monitoring and management framework, similar to what we've done for influenza for many years, because influenza vaccines need to be tailored every year depending on the circulating strains. Now, COVID may not be exactly the same. In fact, it's not going to be the same as influenza. But if the first thing is to get that information coming in on the variants, so you need the epidemiological information, the clinical data, as well as the genomic sequencing data coming in from the countries. And we now have a framework for how you name these variants. We don't want them to be called by the names of countries or cities because that stigmatizes. So we've come up with a nomenclature, a standardized system. We need to monitor this. We need to do a lot more research, especially as vaccines are getting rolled out, to see how effective or not they are. And at the same time, we need to provide guidance, and we have provided some guidance to the developers of new generations of vaccines as to what criteria we'll be looking at in order for a new version of the vaccine to pass the regulatory benchmarks, because it will be impossible for all these newer versions to go through the big phase 3 trials of tens of thousands of people. So we have some surrogate markers, some correlates of protection, which have been agreed by the regulators around the world as serving as a regulatory benchmark for approval. So lots of things happening in parallel at the same time. We need to be prepared for different scenarios. If the world, in fact, really gets serious about controlling transmission now, as we scale vaccination programs, we may be able to contain the development of more mutations and more variants. But if we don't, then we need to be prepared to tackle that in, the coming months and years.
What is your impression so far of the, the clinical success is wonderful, but it doesn't mean anything if you can't mass produce vaccines. When you look at both the 400 million doses that have been deployed so far, what the need is and what the growing capacity is, how optimistic are you from a containment standpoint that the world will be able to manufacture enough vaccine quickly enough to have a real success here? And then, does the administration capacity exist on the ground in order to do that?
Yeah, those are very important points. Currently, it does not appear that the companies that have developed these vaccines will be able to manufacture enough for the entire world, because you remember, normally the entire pharmaceutical industry around the world produces between 3.5 and 5 billion vaccine doses a year. But now we're asking them to produce an additional 10 to 12 billion doses. And so that's a strain on everything, from supply chains to capacity. So that is why we are proposing that there needs to be urgent action by both countries and pharmaceutical producers to do a few things. The first is to explore immediately opportunities for fill and finish. That is, if you have the bulk product and you can't do the fill and finish, let's look for companies around the world where you can take that bulk product to and that can do the fill and finish. And that capacity exists, particularly in the developing world, and it should be used to the maximum. The second is to do voluntary licensing, as some companies have done, to transfer the technology to other companies, again, that have a good history of producing quality vaccines or even drugs, and get them to produce vaccines as well. And again, it would be nice to see this being regionally distributed, having manufacturing sites in different continents that can serve the region. Thirdly, the open sharing of knowledge. There's been a big call now for lifting of patents, but it's not enough to just lift the patent. You also need to share the know-how, the technology, the SOPs, the materials, the cell lines, etc. So that can happen on a big scale, and governments can help because they did provide a lot of funding to companies for the R&D. And so governments can now really encourage and incentivize companies to share that know-how with anyone in the world who has the capacity and the interest and wants to produce vaccines. And finally, we would like companies to come to WHO as quickly as possible with their data, even when they're in early stages of clinical trials, so that we can start doing a rolling review of the data, so we can provide very quick regulatory approvals, get them on the emergency use list, as well as provide policy guidance for countries. And that's where the preparedness comes in. We've been working with countries now for over 6 months, trying to prepare them, trying to get national vaccine deployment plans ready, making sure they have the financing, that they have the human resources, that they have the cold chain in place, that they have their communication strategy. A lot needs to happen to have this kind of a mass adult program of vaccination. Most countries are not used to it. So it's a huge amount of work and preparation, and it also needs additional resources. And this is where the lower middle income countries, I think, are facing a lot of challenges. It's estimated that this program alone can take away 10% of their regular health budget in the least developed countries. And we need to step in with financial assistance to get them through this period.
I want to pivot the conversation to the equity question a little bit, which I think is, personally, when I live in New York City, a United States citizen, I've lived here all my life. I think a lot of the times when people in wealthier developed parts of the world, like the US or Europe, think about health equity, they think about it from the concepts of, either health inequity within their borders, or they think about it from the perspective of, there are poorer countries that often have diseases of those, that we have eradicated in our country. And so health equity to us means going and helping those places. I think the United States and other countries like it have not for a very long time been in a situation where they have been hit incredibly hard by a disease. Look at the United States, more than 500,000 people dead, economic devastation, so on and so forth. And there's certainly seems to be an attitude here and in other wealthier countries. We've seen this in how they have pre-purchased vaccines of, not thinking about how do we help the rest of the world, but how do we deal with the disaster here in some of these places that have been quite brutally hit by this virus. When you think about kind of the conversation around global equity of a vaccine, does this to you feel different than other issues that WHO has dealt with from a public health standpoint? And how do you explain that to a wealthy developed nation that usually you might be in the position of asking, hey, you need to do your part to help people outside of your borders, but now is having to think very much, hey, we have a problem here at home that we have to solve. Is that conversation different than it has been in the past?
Yeah, because it's a pandemic, I think people need to understand this is a little different. It's not about charity and having to help others, but I'll give you the arguments for why vaccine rollout, for example, needs to be done, in all parts of the world at the same time. First of all, the disease, if it's running out of control in some parts of the world, and whereas other countries, are vaccinating their entire population and building up immunity, it may not help in the long run because this virus, we've seen it's mutating, and it's mutating in a way that is making it more transmissible and in some cases more severe and more resistant to vaccines and antibody treatments and so on. So having a part of the world where this is happening is eventually going to catch up. And these viruses, we know how they traveled around the world last year, will come back and infect people even though they've been vaccinated. That's a very real possibility. So there is a real scientific and epidemiological argument for having this mass wide scale rollout of vaccination campaign. There's also the economic argument because the world economy can hardly get back to normal if large parts of the world are still down on their knees, struggling, with the economy in tatters, health systems collapsed. And there have been many economic analyses which show that high-income countries will continue to pay a huge price for the global economy not recovering. So again, having an island where everyone is protected isn't going to help with economic recovery. And thirdly, of course, there's the moral and ethical argument. You cannot value human lives differently, and you can't accept that people in some parts of the world, including doctors and nurses, continue to die while the young and healthy are getting protected in other parts of the world. So there's, of course, that ethical argument as well. But there are the economic and the scientific arguments, which are very strong, which argue for this. And this is why the COVAX facility said, let's first vaccinate 20% of the population in every country, because the 20% we had calculated would cover most of the vulnerable groups. And then we can go to the groups with less risk of severe disease and death. But that unfortunately hasn't happened. We're seeing some countries racing ahead to vaccinate their entire populations, and others, like I said, where even the healthcare providers are still waiting for their first doses.
Have the countries that are able from an economic standpoint to contribute to the COVAX facility, have they done enough at this point? I mean, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the participation in the COVAX facility from that standpoint?
In terms of donor funding, I think COVAX has done relatively well. There's been the target of about $8 billion for this year, 2021, and I think we're still about $2 billion short of that, but there's been very generous support from many donor countries around the world. The problem is that doesn't address the issue of immediate vaccine supplies and doses. And that is where we also need to ensure that countries do not put in place restrictions on exports, for example, of raw materials or a finished product, which will impede the global supply chains. So the funding is needed, it's very welcome, and we are confident that we can raise the remaining funds for this year. Of course, again, we have to look at 2022 and beyond, but we also need to make sure that countries are doing much more than providing funding. They're looking at all the other obstacles and bottlenecks to make sure that vaccines are produced in larger volumes and distributed equitably.
Well, I know we're just about out of time, and I think this feels like a good place to leave it and for everyone to continue thinking about this. Dr. Swaminathan, thank you so much for spending the time to speak with me. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we'll get to speak again soon and when we have a little bit better news to discuss. So Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.